What's up, everybody? Matt Kajeski here, back again with the Stokastic DFS channel. And today we're talking college football DFS. It's week 10, the main slate. We're here to break down everything you need to know. But before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you today by Prize Picks. And if you've never heard of Prize Picks, these are daily prop-based offerings. You're making lineups of player props. These are over-unders, all your major statistical categories. If we're talking college football, it's passing yards, rushing yards, receiving yards, touchdowns, you name it, they have it. They also have more sports: NFL, MLB, NHL, NBA, others. You can mix and match these within your lineups too, and you're building lineups up to 5 players where you can 10x your entry fee. I love mixing and matching college football with NFL. Those are the two sports I know the most, but if you know another sport, you can definitely do that. And better yet, they have an offer for you guys. First match deposit bonus up to $100 with your first deposit. And you're going to get 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum when you make your first deposit with Prize Picks. All you got to do, click the link in the video description below to take advantage. All right, let's dive into the main slate. We've got a lot to get to, so we're going to get right into this. If you watch these videos before, you've seen the data factors up at the top, your matchup data. Pace, that's seconds per play, pass rate. You're going to see offensive line, defensive interactions, Vegas data, and then where these defenses allow production, overall yardage, and then per attempt. For those of you on podcast, you can find this at the YouTube channel. The first game we have is Ohio State taking on Northwestern, and this has bloodbath written all over it. It's a 38.5 point spread, 58 total. We got to talk about the Ohio State side. They are slow, 113th, and their pass rate is just 46.7%, but they're so explosive, it doesn't even matter. CJ Stroud, he's averaging 296.5 passing yards per game on just 28 attempts. He's not mobile, so he needs to get there through the air. Fortunately, this matchup should set him up for an elite ceiling performance. The one thing I'll say is generally when spreads get north of 4 touchdowns, so 28 and above, that's where you run the risk of backups playing a significant amount of time as long as it plays to the spread. So we can't guarantee that, but this is pretty far north of 28 points. We're talking 38.5. I think we probably see Stroud sit part of this game, but you also have to factor in if it gets to that spread, then CJ Stroud probably had a really good game and something to do with it along the way. So just something to think about. I'd be worried about some of the other players here for Ohio State. Mayan Williams left their last game after 2 carries. Even if he's healthy enough to go, which I think he should be, you run the risk of, okay, maybe this team just decides to use more backups to preserve this team overall for more important games down the stretch. It's their easiest matchup in conference the entire year. But that could also benefit Trevion Henderson. He carried the lion's share of the work without Williams last week. These two generally form a 50-50 committee in competitive spots, but when games get out of hand, you see more Hayden. You're going to see more Chip Trayanum. He was the transfer from Arizona State who came over to play linebacker, but he was a running back for Arizona State. It's probably a mess, and these are just efficiency-based GPP plays at this point. The receiving game's kind of the same. We're not going to see Jackson Smith and Jigba again. He's already been ruled out. That means Marvin Harrison, Emeka Egbuka, and Julian Fleming should round out the 3 wide receiver sets and play most of the game. Egbuka is coming off just a horrific showing. Harrison off an amazing showing, conversely, but both these guys averaging over 95 yards per game, over 8 targets. They're your GPP efficiency-based plays, and you probably want at least someone from this offense. Fleming, only 3.5 targets per game over the last 4, but he plays almost every single snap when games are competitive. And if these guys do get into a blowout, I think we see more Xavier Johnson and probably some other ancillary receivers that you're not targeting anyway. Cade Stover finally saw his price rise after a 6-target game. He plays almost every single snap too, so he's viable in tournaments. Northwestern has a 9.75 implied team total. This is a team you should just X out. But for those of you curious, Brennan Sullivan's their quarterback. He's not playable. Their running backs are not playable. Their receivers are not playable. Malik Washington is too expensive at 4.6. Donnie Navarro at 3.8, too expensive. These guys are just target-based GPP plays. If you're running an Ohio State onslaught, you want to run back, I would prefer Donnie Navarro because he has 7.1 targets per game, but I'm going to X out this whole team. That is my approach with Northwestern. I would be shocked if I play anyone from this team, but that's the plan right now. No more reason to spend time on it. Texas Tech, TCU. Now this game is awesome. 69.5 total, 9.5 point spread in favor of TCU. Texas Tech plays at hyper speed, second in pace, 58% pass rate. The problem is they don't have a quarterback. They returned Tyler Shuck from injury last week. He played 9 snaps. He threw an interception and took 3 sacks. Donovan Smith has the best mobility, so he masks the offensive line deficiencies more than the others, but ultimately he's fallen out of favor. Baron Morton had a horrific game. He completed less than 40% of his passes against Baylor. The one thing we can say here is TCU does not have the same front that Baylor does. That's the best defensive line in the conference. And their coaching staff has spoken a lot about getting the ball quickly to mask these offensive line woes. Because there's the chance that all 3 of them play. All 3 played last week. It's a really tough situation to target, but I expect Morton to start. He's the only one that's playable in tournaments because of it. Still a really tough situation to get to. In the running back room, we've got Sarajic and Taj Brooks in a 50-50 committee balance, slightly towards Brooks recently. He's more active in the receiving game as well, but these are GPP darts that I'm not all that interested in. It's a pass-based team with a middling total. 30 is actually pretty good, but in the receiving room, you've got Jaron Bradley, Miles Price, and Trey Cleveland as your top 3 options, presumably. Last week, the targets were number 1, Jaron Bradley. He had 7. And then you came Miles Price at 3, Xavier White with 3. Trey Cleveland only had 1. But I like to defer to the routes. The one thing I'll say here is this team runs so many raw plays that you're going to see rotation. No one's ever going to have 100% route share. 70% routes on this team is like 100% of the other team because of the raw volume. But Jaron Bradley led the team in targets, only 46% route rate. Trey Cleveland only had 1 target, but he led the team in routes, 69%. I think he's live. Miles Price should play more, coming a little bit up in the future because he's coming off the injury. 40% route rate. Xavier White, 33%. Nehemiah Martinez, 37.5%. Louis Fungi, 43.5%. He's not very good, so I wouldn't probably play him. But ultimately, all this to say, it's a nasty rotation for these guys. So to rank them, that's what we want here. Price adjusted, I'm going number 1, Jaron Bradley. Number 2, Miles Price. Number 3, Trey Cleveland. And I'm probably not getting anyone else other than those guys. If I do, it's going to be Nehemiah Martinez because he's the Stoneman. TCU, 78th in pace, 46% pass rate. They'll play faster than this. Sonny Dykes is consistently in the top 20 in pace. Just depends on matchup. And they've got a team on the other side that likes to get into track meets. Duggan's been awesome. At this point of the year, it's laughable that they ever started Chandler Morris over him, but he has 276 rushing yards cumulatively. He's averaging 276 through the air in just 27.5 attempts, which is crazy considering he didn't play most of the first game. So Duggan's stats are depressed, but still awesome. He's playable at 8,500. This team has a near 40 implied team total. His ceiling is very clear. Kendrick Miller's been awesome as well here. He's now averaging 105 rushing yards per game. He's averaging 17.9 touches. So he's doing this on not the best efficiency or not the best volume. It's all efficiency driven. But when the going gets tough, we have seen TCU ride him. Prior to the 12 carry game last week, he carried the ball 18, 22, and 29 times in 3 straight games. So it made sense. They gave him a little bit of a break here. I expect Kendrick Miller to be fine. They won't adjust his price. So he's still 6,300. That is pure GPP territory. Awesome tournament play. In the receiving game, Quentin Johnson got banged up last week. Looks like he's going to play through it. His targets are volatile. He's only averaging 8.3 per game, but we've seen them as high as 17, as low as single digits, 81 yards per game. He's the number 1 stacking option with Duggan. And from there, this team has bounced around with routes. I do think Savion Williams is still tentatively the wide receiver 2. He just has better routes than Darius Davis and Tay Barber. But one thing I'll say is Darius Davis ran more routes than Savion last week. 79% for Davis, 76% for Savion. Barber came in at 66%. He's had the most volatile role of this bunch. Now I think I prefer Davis to Savion overall just because the targets have been so much better. 34 on the year to 20, but it's still close. And Davis is not a particularly strong value. His targets are really volatile for paying that price. You're essentially just trying to access the TCU offense in a way that it's not Quentin Johnston, which has not been profitable this year. So it's tough to say. I'll mix and match some of these guys. I still like Savion because of the price savings, but not the best situation outside of Johnston. Kentucky, Missouri. It's not a good DFS game. It's a 40 total, 1-point spread in favor of Missouri. So we'll go through this relatively quick. Kentucky ranks 130th in pace. They pass 45.5% of the time. Will Levis is hurt. He's playing through it. and it's really affected his efficiency. He also seemingly lost all his mobility after he was pretty good last year on the ground. He has negative 71 yards. He's just flat out too expensive for this matchup, and he's hurt too, playing through it. It's not good. We saw Chris Rodriguez leave last week's game with a groin injury, only 15 carries, which was a far cry from what he'd seen the week prior. 30 carries down to 15. He's awesome on the ground. He's really efficient. His role is solid. We just can't bank on the health right now. He might miss this game flat out. And last week, Cavassier Smoke didn't play. I think we see some sort of timeshare between like Juton, McLean, Lavelle Wright. Again, I don't know who's healthy here. So this is a pure watch Kentucky pregame and see if Rodriguez plays. He's an outside consideration in tournaments. If not, it's probably a stay away. And this receiving core, Tavion Robinson's been banged up this year. Barry and Brown's been banged up this year. Dane Key played a lot last week. Jordan Dingle's been involved as their tight end. They're all just a bit too expensive for a team that projects really bad on this slate. If I were playing one, it would be Tavion, but I think I'll avoid it. Missouri, 20.5 implied team total. This is also not very good. Brady Cook, he's mobile, and he takes advantage of Missouri's 44.6% pass rate. So, 215 rush yards for Cook is solid, but he's purely a game manager. He averages 208 passing yards per game. There's just better options here. The ceiling is limited. He'd probably have to punch in one or two on the ground to get you a tournament-winning ceiling. He's your high floor, low ceiling type option. The backfield is curious here. They benched Nathaniel Pete, and their coaching staff's been very vocal about changes to this backfield. That allowed Cody Schrader to carry 22 times with 3 targets. It's 25 touches. I don't think this goes back to the timeshare. I think it's Schrader forward. Brady Cook also really involved in the ground. He had 13 designed attempts last week. Schrader's 4,400. As a home favorite, it's a bad game environment, but the touches here are solid for his price. I'm going to play some Schrader for sure. The receiving game is tough. 5-star freshman Luther Burden. He's essentially just catching screens and falling down. He's averaging 25 yards per game. He's just flat out not dynamic right now. He's been hurt, so that could be it. He's also a freshman. He could be just young, but he kind of is like this hollow volume player where, there's not much upside catching screens and falling down. But Dominic Lovett seems to have some upside. 6.9 targets per game, 81 yards for Lovett. He's middling in price. I think an outside consideration in tournaments, but I don't love it. And then from there, nobody has more than 200 receiving yards. Nobody is averaging more than 30 per game. I'm not targeting anyone other than Lovett or Burden. UNC Virginia, 59 total, 7.5 point spread. Both these teams are fast. I think the only reason the total's so low is due to some injuries, but North Carolina 16th in pace, 52% pass rate. Drake May is so good. 439 rushing yards cumulatively. He averages 331.5 through the air on 34.3 attempts. He's not expensive enough. He should be the most expensive signal caller on the slate, and he's not. He's probably in your cash lineup, an awesome tournament play. I don't think he'll be owned enough. Virginia does play good defense. It hasn't mattered for May. He's diced up better defenses than this. He's just a rock-solid play right now. For running back, they lost Caleb Hood, and it's been a timeshare most of the year, so I'm not sure how this is divvied up. I would expect Omarion Hampton a little more involved, but Elijah Green out-touched him. Both of them are above 5K, so it's a situation where I would probably just rather go down and play like a Schrader or maybe another play we haven't mentioned yet, but I would probably like to see this consolidated more before I target a backfield like this. First of all, it's a pass-heavy team. Second of all, it's a timeshare regardless. Third of all, I don't know who leads it, so it's a tough situation to get to. The receiving game, holy smokes, this is an awesome stack. Josh Downs, 16 targets last week. He's averaging 10 per game, 88 yards. He's awesome. Antoine Green egregiously was below 4K on the night slate last week. 12 targets, well over 100 yards. He's averaging 113 yards per game on 6.4 targets. Elite deep threat ability, and he's still too cheap at 6K. You can play either of these guys without a doubt. J.J. Jones is the wide receiver 3. It's not reflected in target share, but if you look at routes run, it's very clearly him. Last week, he was on the field for 91% of the routes. So J.J. Jones, he's 4.4K, not targeted a lot, but for those of you like trying to double stack Drake May efficiently, J.J. Jones could make some sense. They rotate tight ends, so I'm not too interested in the Kamari Moraleses or the ancillary receivers here. It's going to be the top 3. On the Virginia side, 29th in pace, 54.5% pass rate, but Brennan Armstrong, ankle sprain. He's going to play through it allegedly. That hurts because he relies on his mobility, 353 rushing yards on the year. I don't know how much this is affected, but I know an ankle sprain is not good at the very least. His efficiency as a passer is also plummeted without his old OC, Robert Anae, who's with Syracuse. Volume's not too different. He's averaging 33.5 attempts per game, but just 227 yards. The offensive line is atrocious. He's a tough sell at 7,100, honestly. He's way overpriced, and now considering marginalized mobility, I'm probably just avoiding. The backfield's a three-way timeshare between Paris Jones, Xavier Brown, Mike Hollins. That's a disaster. The receiving game does have some clarity. I think Billy Kemp misses this game. He got hurt again last week. We'll have to watch him. They did rotate more than normal here, but Keaton Thompson leads the team with 579 yards. That's 72 per game on 9.6 targets. Dontavian Wicks comes in at 8.9 targets per game, 54 yards. Lavelle Davis, he's the wide receiver 3, but he's been targeted less recently, just 3.8 targets per game over the last 4. None of these guys are particularly solid price-adjusted plays at this point because the offense has been so bad, but they pass a lot. You could work your way into some cheap PPR volume, and plus, like, the pass rate's high. So, I mean, the chance for a big play is always going to be there. They've also been rotating a few other guys on the field. You're going to see Grant Misch, Sackett Wood among tight ends. Demick Starling plays a little bit. It's pretty tough out here for Virginia these days. Tulane taking on Tulsa. Fun game in real life, 57.5 total. Tulane is a 7.5 point favorite. They're 80th in pace with a 44% pass rate. Even with the heavy run rate here, Michael Pratt's been good. Now, we missed a game, so his stats are a little depressed, but 215 cumulative rushing yards. He's involved in the ground game. 244.5 passing yards in just 28 attempts. He's efficient as a passer. Tulsa's defense is particularly giving on the ground, 4.9 yards per attempt allowed. Michael Pratt's cheap. I think a lot of builds are going to involve Pratt and an expensive signal caller, whether it's Duggan, Hooker, Drake May, someone expensive just to make salary work, but Pratt's live, and I think he's an outside consideration in cash because of the price. At running back, we used to see a timeshare here, but it has fully become the Tajay Spears show, and this dude is awesome. 74 rush yards per game, 17.5 touches. He's eclipsed that in 3 straight games. Tajay Spears has a sick workload. 18 touches, 22 touches, 25 touches in the last 3 games. This guy, awesome pass game role. He has 19 targets. Tajay Spears is too cheap. He deserves to be more expensive against this bad Tulsa run defense. The receiving room is a bit different, though. Nobody has more than 6 targets in any of the last 4 games. Nobody has a target share higher than 14.2%. That's Day-Day McDougal. And the routes are split really across the board. The most efficient receiver has been Shea Wyatt. He leads the team with 366 yards, followed by Jaquan Jackson at 320, followed by Deuce Watts at 307. So you have the most targeted receiver, far from the most efficient. Nobody getting more than 6 targets per game. I think you probably just pay down for Shea Wyatt if you play anybody. But, I mean, you could play Lawrence Keys. You could play Jaquan Jackson, tight end Tyreek James. I'm probably not playing a Tulane pass catcher because not only do the scores have to come through the air, but you have to guess which one of them gets it. Much prefer Tajay Spears in the backfield. For Tulsa, 18th in pace, 51.4% pass rate. The issue here is Davis Brin got hurt. No update on his status. He's essentially a pocket statue pocket passer, negative 71 rush yards, averages 262 through the air, which is awesome for the receivers. But when he went down, they moved to Braylon Baxton, who is maybe the polar opposite. He's a dual threat. He's essentially non-proven, no sample on him, so we don't know how good he is as a passer. For DFS purposes, I would rather play Braxton because of the mobility, but I don't know. The effect of the offense could be drastic. When Brin's in there, you have solid target shares for both Keelan Stokes, Juan Carlos Santana, and Isaiah Epps. If you look at their numbers, Stokes averages 115 yards per game on 10 targets. If Braxton comes in, does that drop? It could. I'm not sure. Juan Carlos Santana, 71.5 yards per game and 8.3 targets. Isaiah Epps, 42 yards per game and 6.3 targets. I'd be a little hesitant to play the Tulsa pass catchers if Brin is out. We won't know this till game time, though, so it's tough to see. We also have an injury in the backfield. Steven Anderson didn't play in their last game. that's kind of opened the door for Deneric Prince. He's had at least 19 carries in 3 of the last 4 games. Still volatile. We see when Tulsa gets crushed, like he could carry as little as 4 times. They moved to Jordan Ford as the change of pace without Anderson. So this is at least something worth monitoring. But I think Deneric Prince is an outside consideration in tournaments. He's just a touchdown underdog here, so that's tough. Florida A&M, a 54 total, a 3-point spread in favor of A&M. Seen this going to 3.5 in some spots. These teams are almost identical in pace. Florida's 86th, A&M's 85th. Pass rate, Florida is pretty heavy here to the run. They're 46.7% pass rate. A&M is a 56.4% pass rate, mainly because of negative game script. I don't think they want to pass that much, but let's start with Florida, the underdog. Anthony Richardson's 5,800. I like him as a play. I just have questions, and it stems from health first and foremost. He got banged up in their most recent game early, played through it. He's had 11 design rush attempts in the last 4 games. That's not going to cut it. If it's injury or just their coach being a moron, I don't know. All I know is it's not going to cut it for DFS. He does have 410 rushing yards. He needs to rush more even to pay off this salary at 5,800 because he's not a good passer. 204 passing yards per game on 26 attempts. The health is enough of a question here for me to at least limit Anthony Richardson. I don't want to play him in cash because of this. If you project him fully, he's going to probably appear in some cash builds, and this A&M defense certainly doesn't scare you, particularly against the run. 4.9 yards per carry allowed. But again, Richardson's not running, so I don't know what to do with this. They did remove Naquan Wright from their rotation in the backfield. That means it's just Montrell Johnson, Trevor Etienne, but it's still 9.5 touches per game for Johnson, 8.9 for Etienne. You can find better price-adjusted plays in these guys. And then in the pass game, again, it's a non-efficient passing attack. Justin Shorter leads the team with 42 targets. He's 1 ahead of Xavier Henderson. And then Ricky Pearsall comes in at 32. Yardage has also gone that way too. It's Shorter 1, Henderson 2, Pearsall 3. And that's the exact inverse of their pricing. So I would just play Shorter. But they've recently started involving more pass catchers here. I don't know where this goes, and I'm a little hesitant to bank on any Florida pass catcher. The last thing I'll say is we've got some injuries in the tight end room. I believe Dante Zanders is out, which Keon Zipperer could be viable at 3.6K without Zanders, but don't feel good about any Florida pass catcher for the most part. For Texas A&M, again, I think their pass rate's a little higher than they would like it to be, but they've moved to Connor Wegman. So we got to talk about that. Haynes King's hurt. Max Johnson's hurt, at least to some degree. In addition to being hurt, this is an antiquated offense, which hinders the quarterback more than it helps it. So seeing that Wegman performance was awesome to start the year. He looks semi-mobile. He passed efficiently. The thing with Wegman that we can really look to here is he's unproven. And when quarterbacks are unproven, that means they might be too cheap. So for example here, if Wegman's the real deal, he probably is never 5,400 again. So for tournaments, I think he's live for that reason. The backfield, we know exactly what A-Chain is. He's an absolute stud. 25 touches or 25 carries in their most recent game. 8 targets. He hasn't seen fewer than 5 targets in any of the last 4 games. He's averaging 6.5 targets per game. And now with the, man, A-Chain is just so good. He's way too cheap. He's the best price-adjusted runner on the entire slate. Without Aeneas Smith, and I guess with Chris Marshall off the team, presumably for the near future, suspended, it's really condensed the rotation at receiver. It's one Evan Stewart, who's averaging 11.8 targets per game over the last 4. If anything, that's just awesome PPR volume. Moose Muhammad had 12 targets last game. With Chris Marshall out, like, we've just really seen everything condensed for this team. And the wide receiver 3 has been a bit of a rotation. Donovan Green's been the next most consistent pass catcher behind these 2 receivers. I'm going to be playing some Evan Stewart as I have the last couple weeks, and I'll continue targeting Moose Muhammad as the wide receiver 2. The actual wide receiver 3, for those of you curious, was Noah Thomas. Noah Thomas, he popped up for 2 targets. He's the Stoneman, but his route rate was at 81%. So that's where I would go here. And last thing to mention on this team, this game, it looks like Justin Shorter is questionable for the game. There was a report out there that he's questionable, so I would just watch Justin Shorter. Obviously, if he's out, I wouldn't prefer him. I think they probably move to Trent Whitmore as the next receiver up, but I don't think that's a guarantee. I would probably just play Xavier or Pearsall in that instance. Minnesota, Nebraska, 15.5-point spread in favor of the Gophers. The total in this game is 46.5. Tanner Morgan, he's basically a glorified game manager because Minnesota ranks 129th in pace. They have a 36% pass rate. He's somewhat mobile with 91 yards, but it's more so just escaping sacks, not really providing much on his own. He only averages 184 yards per game on 21 attempts, not 24. It's even worse. There's just no upside with Morgan, even at the price. He's your stereotypical high floor, low ceiling guy. That stems to the pass catchers too. And I think the only guy that's worth mentioning is Brevin Spanford is a really cheap target getter. At least 6 targets in each of the last 4 games. 6.8 targets per game in that span. Averages 43.5 yards. That could be semi-usable. Daniel Jackson is essentially the same thing, but he's a little more expensive. I'd rather play Brevin Spanford. But the guy we really need to talk about is Mo Ibrahim, 7,300. Since we've seen his price fall from like the 9K range, I've had a ton more interest in him. Good matchup against Nebraska, big favorite. He had 36 carries last week. 36 carries for Mo Ibrahim. Holy smokes. He's now been at 29 or more in each of the last 2 games. He's a rock solid play at this price. Nebraska, we lost Casey Thompson. He's not going to play here. They tried to play Chuba Purdy, and he was so bad that they had to move to Smothers. Word out of Nebraska is that both are going to play here. That's a disaster situation. Don't play either one. The backfield, they've just been getting crushed so bad in games. We haven't been able to see the Anthony Grant workload that we previously saw. So 12 carries last week. This is a big issue moving forward for him. I don't have a ton of interest in the backfield. He also got dinged up, which they already lost Gabe Irving. They already lost A.J. Allen. If Grant misses time, I'm guessing you're going to see Jaquez Yant and Ramir Johnson split work. But, man, we're really getting to the bottom of the barrel with those guys. Grant would be an outside consideration in tournaments if he plays, but the team total is just 15 points. It's a disaster. Trey Palmer continues to be the engine of the offense. He had a terrible game last week on 7 targets. Just the quarterbacks can't get him the ball. And especially if it's Smothers or Purdy, man, I don't know if I can play Palmer at this price, 7K. Love the guy. He has a 31% target share, 98 yards per game. It's over 100 if you exclude last week's dreadful showing from Purdy and Smothers, but if those guys play, I think I'm probably going to X out Palmer, as sad as it is. Love him overall. From there, you've got Marcus Washington, Alante Brown as the 2 and 3. Travis Vokolek is the most of the time tight end. Oliver Martin been mixing in occasionally when healthy. All avoids. It's a sad day for Nebraska football. Baylor taking on Oklahoma, 3.5-point spread in favor of the Sooners, 59 total here. Baylor's been playing better recently. They've just been finishing the games they should finish. 89th in pace, 42.5% pass rate. Blake Shapen's another game manager. So 57 rushing yards, it's not enough to overcome his limited pass game role, which is 27.4 attempts per game, 227 yards. Another high floor, low ceiling guy. The backfield, we might see the return of Craig Squirrel Williams, as some of you may know him. But this backfield's been weird. We saw a period of time where Richard Reese was the bell cow. Then we saw him kind of eased off. Then the last 2 games, he's been the bell cow again. 31 carries, 37 carries. If he's going to carry the ball 30 times, he needs to be played. If Williams returns, I don't know if that's the case. Quaylon Jones is the pass catching back. And Quaylon Jones still carrying the ball 9 and 8 times a piece the last 2 games as well. Reese is a dynamic freshman, though. He's averaging 99 yards per game. Doesn't catch the ball. I think he needs to be in your GPP pool. I would prefer Kendry Miller. I would prefer like more expensive backs like Ibrahim, but I'm going to play some Reese. I feel like have to at this point. He does have 2 and 3 targets for what it's worth. He touched the ball 40 times last week. 40 times. My goodness. Oklahoma's not great in run defense either. 4.6 yards per carry. Anyway, the receivers, Monterey Baldwin, questionable here. That's a big question for this offense. They've just ebbed and flowed at receiver all year long. It's been 1 week Monterey pops up, then Gavin Holmes. Hal Presley had a 9-target game last week. Tight end Ben Sims has been involved. Drake Dabney went down for the year last week, so Sims should be even more involved. It's a dice roll with Baylor pass catchers. I'd rather play Reese. On the other side, Dylan Gabriel finally priced to play. No more 9K Dylan Gabriel, and I can get behind this. Probably not for cash, but he does have 180 rushing yards on the year. Most of that came on 1 carry, but he's still averaging 253 as a passer. That's depressed. Remember, he got knocked out of the TCU game before halftime. That depresses his stats. 29 attempts. It'd be over 30 if you included a full TCU game, which he didn't play. He's now firmly in play for tournaments. I had less interest previously because of the price, but now at 7,800, you can stack him for sure. The backfield's a mess. Javonte Barnes missed their last game. He might return here. Eric Gray went down late in the game. I don't know if either play. I think they're going to get back at least one. If they do, it's a timeshare with Marcus Major, who returned from injury himself for 12 carries. Gray is the most interesting. They've wanted to use him in a timeshare, but he still averages 100 yards per game. It's just a volatile role. We don't know necessarily what Oklahoma is going to do. There have been periods where Gray's the bell cow, then they've tried to put him in a timeshare, then injuries forced him back into bell cow. He's hurt now. Watch this pregame. I would have a lot more interest if this is narrowed to 2 or 1 rusher, but I need to see who's healthy. In a vacuum, I prefer Gray to Barnes to Major. In the receiving game, I don't know what the deal is, man. It's now 2 coaching staffs. They can't figure out Marvin Mims. Maybe he's just not that good and I was wrong, which is possible, but 6,900 for 7.4 targets per game and 69.5 yards, just volatile. The last 4 games, here are his targets: 10, 3, 15, 6. It's like up and down with Mims. He's certainly viable in tournaments. If you catch the 15 target game, you're going to want him, but I don't have any confidence that it's coming this week. And then from there, they've rotated receivers. Braden Willis, their tight end's the second most consistent, 4.3 targets per game. He's the second leading receiver. Jalil Farouk has seen his routes cut. Theo Weiss has seen his routes cut to almost nothing in favor of Drake Stoops. 4K Drake Stoops, still only averaging 3.5 targets per game. This offense is a mess to stack. I prefer Mims 1, honestly, Braden Willis 2, and then Drake Stoops 3, as crazy as that sounds. Here's the game. Tennessee, Georgia, 8-point spread in favor of Georgia, 66 total. The game's in Athens. 2 drastically different offenses. Tennessee's 6th in pace, Georgia's 108. So fast, Tennessee's slow Georgia. Tennessee's run heavy, 43% pass rate. Georgia's pass heavy, 51%. Wildly different offenses. Hendon Hooker is awesome. 292 passing yards per game on 27.5 attempts. He has 338 cumulative rushing yards. Already beat up on Bama. He can beat the best competition in the country. I think he's got to be in your tournament pool. You got to consider stacking him. He's done it against everybody. Georgia's defense is largely untested. The best opponent they've faced outside of Oregon week 1, who they gave up a lot of yardage to, just Bo Nix threw a ton of interceptions. Probably Missouri. I don't know. But Hendon Hooker has a clear ceiling. 8K's probably not expensive enough, even in a tough matchup. In the backfield, it's Jabari Small is the 1A. Jalen Wright is the 1B. When the going gets tough, you'll see more work for Jabari. He's viable in tournaments, had 21 carries last week. Season-long numbers aren't going to be good. Just they run so many plays that they're forced into a rotation to some degree, but I'll still play some small. The receiving room fully healthy now. Tillman returned 4 targets. You think that only gets better for him. He's the number 1 receiver from last year, but Jalen Hyatt's been so good in his stead. He's now averaging 113 yards per game on 7.3 targets. It's not even a voluminous role. It's just hyper efficient. And then Brew McCoy coming in with 5.4 targets per game. I'm going to stack all of them. They run a rotation at tight end, so it's exclusively Hyatt, Brew McCoy, and Tillman. And I tell you what, I'm going to take some shots on Tillman coming back from the injury. He's just too cheap at 6,100. For Georgia, again, they pass a lot. Tennessee has a weak secondary, on paper at least. They've been giving this year at times. Stetson Bennett is averaging 294 passing yards per game on 33 attempts. That's pretty efficient. He has 117 rush yards, so that's solid here too. Stetson is fine at his price, and I'll play some to be contrarian. From there, we have the backfield. Kendall Milton may return this week. That would be a boon to them. But if that happens, you probably see 4 runners: Daiwan Edwards, Kenny McIntosh, Kendall Milton, and Branson Robinson, making it really hard to target any of them, especially with McIntosh and Edwards seeing their price rise in the absence of Milton. But in the receiving game, no AD Mitchell for this team. They really consolidated routes to Bowers and McConkey last week, both over 90%. You're stacking Georgia using this game. They're probably too cheap. Darnell Washington over a 50% route share, 6 targets for him. Marcus Rosemy-Jackson is the actual wide receiver 2 right now. So his routes aren't ideal, but as far as a Georgia player goes with a 3,100 price tag, I think you can play Rosemy-Jackson. His routes came in at 50% last week. From there, Dylan Bell, 37%, Kyrus Jackson, 40%. Excuse me. A lot of talking on Georgia. I think you can play any of the top 4 for sure. McConkey, Bowers, Washington, Jackson, in that order. Oregon, Colorado, another 31.5 point spread. So north of 30, you got to be worried about potential easing off the gas with starters, 61.5 total. Oregon, 46.5 team total. Bo Nix, most expensive quarterback on the slate. Who would have thought it? 441 cumulative rushing yards. He's averaging 277.5 as a passer in 31 attempts. When it makes sense, you just play Bo Nix at this point. If you have the salary, play him. If you don't, that's fine. He's not the best price-adjusted play, but holy smokes, his ceiling is awesome. In the run game, you probably see this as more of a timeshare because of the game script, but it's in competitive games, it's gone Bucky Irving, Whittington, Sean Dollars, then Jordan James. It's probably going to be more spread in non-competitive games, but Bucky, he's the most efficient by far, 12.9 touches per game. He'd be the guy I go to in tournaments. In the receiving room, Troy Franklin's been awesome, 74.5 yards per game on 5.9 targets. You wish the volume was a little better, but they haven't needed it to be. Chase Cota got hurt, so that should elevate Chris Hudson to the wide receiver 2. I would expect Deontay Thornton to be the 3, and they rotate 4 tight ends, so I don't want any part of that. But Chris Hudson's less expensive than Deontay Thornton. That shouldn't be the case. You can play 4K Hudson, and Franklin's always going to be a good tournament play. Colorado's a mess. Owen McCown has returned to practice. We don't know if he plays yet, but they have a 15 implied team total, so this is a moot point anyway. You're not playing anyone in Colorado. They've had really injured running backs. Allegedly, Alex Fontenot is going to come back this week, which hurts really the only viable player on the team, Deion Smith, who carried 24 times last week. If Fontenot returns, this was a 50-50 timeshare prior to that. They also haven't had Anthony Hankerson. I don't know if you even want to play Deion Smith at 24 carries at his price, given the team total. Probably not. They didn't have Daniel Arias last week. This was a benching. He's dropped a lot of passes. They just benched him. Jordan Tyson, 11 targets. RJ Sneed, 6. Montana Lemonius Craig, 5 targets. And then Brady Russell, 4. I still think you don't want to play any Colorado pass catchers. But if you want to get one, it's going to be Jordan Tyson for me. Just cheap enough where maybe the PPR volume is enough. Similar to like a Dimitri Stanley last week, but not ideal. Oklahoma State, Kansas. This is a fun game. A lot of injuries hinging in the balance here. 65 total, 2-point spread in favor of the Cowboys. Spencer Sanders is hurt. We'll see if he plays through the game. If he does, it's positive for DFS. They're 4th in pace, 51.5% pass rate. Sanders has 343 rushing yards this year, 36 attempts per game. It's maybe the biggest drop-off from starter to backup. If he doesn't play, Gunnar Gundy's terrible. He can run a little bit, but he's just flat out too expensive for his talent level. Dominic Richardson didn't play last week, so they devolved into a 3-way committee featuring Jaden Nixon, Ollie Gordon, DeAndre Jackson. Nixon and Jackson led the way here. I think Jackson might get more work, but it's still the 3-way committee. If Richardson returns, I think it might be a committee regardless. He's been terrible when he's active. The receiving game's tough. Jaden Bray and Braden Johnson were both listed on the depth chart this week, which complicates matters because we've really only had 4 receivers that are playable at any time for this team because of injuries, but they're going to use 6 guys maybe when fully healthy because John Paul Richardson plays 8.5 targets per game over the last 4. Brennan Presley plays 4.5 targets over the last 4. Bryson Green plays 7.3. Braden Johnson's their target leader when healthy and their receiving leader when healthy. Stephon Johnson, their elite freshman, he's averaged 5.3 targets per game and seen 18 targets over the last 2. And then Jaden Bray had 8 targets in his only healthy game. If I'm ranking them when everyone's healthy, it's Braden Johnson 1. I'm still going to go Bryson Green 2 tentatively. Brennan Presley 3, John Richardson 4, Stephon Johnson 5. And I don't know if Jaden Bray plays. We'll see about him. For Kansas, 106th in pace, 43% pass rate. But Jalen Daniels has returned to practice. He may actually play, and he's a difference maker for this team. Oklahoma State does not have a great defense, so he's awesome if he plays. And I'd honestly have a little bit of consideration in Jason Bean if we get news that Daniels is out. But Daniels just superior in every regard. As a passer, he should be averaging about 200 yards per game, but the injury depresses his stats. 341 cumulative rushing yards. He hasn't played in multiple games either, so this is stark and very telling. The backfield's a timeshare. You're going to see some Kai Thomas if he's healthy with Sevion Morrison and Devin Neal. Devin Neal leading the way. Negative game script has really hindered him lately, but I still think he's viable in tournaments. It's only a 2-point spread, so you could very well see Kansas winning this game. Luke Grimm's been banged up. I think he plays here. And when he's active, it's a Luke Grimm, Lawrence Arnold, Quentin Skinner receiving room with Mason Fairchild at tight end. We saw Trevor Wilson return, so maybe he throws a wrench in things here. But this is a situation to monitor for injury. I'm not too excited about playing a Kansas receiver regardless, but that's the state of Kansas. Penn State, Indiana. 14-point spread in favor of Penn State, 50-point total. The disrespect to Penn State right now. I know their season's lost, but you can still play for a lot in this conference. Clifford's a game manager, 227 yards per game on 29 attempts, 131 rushing yards. Not ideal. The backfield's a direct 50-50 split between Singleton and Katron Allen. You need really just elevated efficiency for either to get there, which could happen here. It's Indiana after all. I think both are tournament plays. I'd rather play Singleton still. He's just more efficient than Allen. In the receiving game, Parker Washington put the team on his back. He now only has a 22% target share. This team is super, super sensitive to game script. They go really run heavy when they're playing from ahead. So Washington, I mean, he had seen more than 8 targets in any of the 3 games prior to the Ohio State game. Maybe he sees more just because he's an alpha, but I don't know. Tinsley is averaging 5.5 per game over the last 4. And then we saw Keandre Lambert-Smith play more last week, but they used a lot of 12 personnel with Theo Johnson, Brenton Strange, Tyler Warren. It's basically Tinsley and Washington for me, and then move on. Indiana's hinted at moving to a different quarterback. I have no idea who it's going to be. I don't even think it matters. They have a 18 implied team total. Their offensive line is terrible. Basilek is incompetent. I'm not playing an Indiana signal caller. Their backfield has devolved into a 3-way timeshare, so not just Shevers and Henderson, but they're now involving Jalen Lucas. Okay. They lost their best player on the entire roster, Cam Camper, to a torn ACL. That does potentially open up some really cheap volume. Emery Simmons should be the 1. Anderson Kobe the 2. And then depending on the health of DJ Matthews, if Matthews is healthy, it'll be him. If not, it's going to be Javon Swinton. I don't want to play any of these guys. Simmons maybe would be the best. 38.5 yards per game for him, 7.5 targets over the last 4. But Kobe honestly is averaging 5.5 too. You might be able to get some cheap PPR volume. Last thing I'll say is AJ Barner, their tight end, returned. He's probably the best play overall. 8 targets, really consistent role, just super low upside. He only has 132 yards in the year. Not much upside with the Indiana team at all. Syracuse, there's been a little bit of debate on whether Schrader was hurt or just benched. Either way, this game has a middling total of 48 points. Pittsburgh's a 3.5-point favorite. Both teams fairly slow. Syracuse 77th in pace, 47.5% pass rate. Schrader's been good through most of the year, so that was a bit of a concern seeing him benched or hurt. I'm not sure. They won't really tell us. But Schrader, 373 yards per game on the ground. Not per game. Cumulatively, sorry. Getting a little late in the show. These are hard to do for 14 games. Anyway, Schrader, good mobility. He's averaging 205 as a passer on 24.5 attempts per game. He's still priced to play. It's just not quite as enticing in this poor game environment here. He's struggled a little bit recently, which makes him a bit of a concern, but we know the volume's there when he's healthy. Sean Tucker, his volume's gotten a little better. 95 yards per game on 23.1 touches. He wasn't cannibalized by Schrader getting benched last week, so, I mean, that's better for Tucker. He still has an awesome target share. Nearly 20%, 32 yards per game, 4.3 targets in the last 4, 5.3 in the year for Tucker. He's solid. Oronde Gadsden's the only player on the team with a consistent route rate for this team. 84 yards per game, 6.8 targets. Everybody else is rotating. If I'm going anywhere outside of this, it's Trevor Pena at the Stoneman. He has 9 targets in the last 2 games, but Devon Cooper, Courtney Jackson, Damian Alford, they're all going to be involved, and that makes it really difficult to get to. Pittsburgh is running a polar opposite offense to last year. 105th in pace, 46% pass rate. Keaton Slovis, he's a pocket statue, really inefficient passer, negative rushing yards on the year. He's cheap, but it's a low game total. I'm not playing Slovis. The one guy you want to look to is Israel Abanaconda, 7,700. He's carried the ball 36, 28, and 26 times in the last 3 games. He's averaging 136 yards. He's also targeted in the pass game, 6 targets over the last 2 games. Abanaconda is awesome. Jared Wayne looks like the wide receiver 1 right now. He's the only one with any efficiency, 572 yards in the year. Mumfield's at 292. He's the 2. And then Bub Means is the 3 with Gavin Bartholomew rounding out the tight end position. They're all efficiently priced, but I think Wayne is pretty clearly the guy to target if you're getting a pit pass catcher. I probably get Mumfield 2, Means 3. Final game, it's UCF Memphis. 58 total, 3.5-point spread in favor of UCF. Plumlee got hurt last week. We don't know if he's going to play. He is a solid price-adjusted play if he does. 532 yards on the ground this year. He's averaging 237.5 as a passer on 27 attempts. UCF plays fast. They're 45th in pace. They're run-heavy, 42% pass rate, which helps Plumlee, honestly. If he doesn't play, I think they go a little more pass heavy with Mikey Keene, who actually played really well last week. He had a terrible 2021 season, but pretty good to start this past year. He's got better weapons. So probably not going to play him, but an outside consideration. The problem is this is a late game, so you're probably going to have to wait on this news unless something breaks. They're finally benching Isaiah Bowser to some degree, at least using him in a timeshare. He's terrible, but RJ Harvey's been awesome. So I think slowly this is going to shift more towards Harvey. Harvey outcarried Bowser 16-14 last week. You still have Johnny Richardson as a change of pace, but RJ Harvey deserves more work. I think he's GPP viable in this spot. The receiving game, it's Ryan O'Keefe 1, Javon Baker 2 right now. I'm not sure how injured Javon Baker still is. He got hurt in their third most recent game, tried to play through it in the second most recent, had to tag himself out. 8 targets in their last game. Looks like he's closer to full health, but they really tried to get Ryan O'Keefe the ball. 11 targets, 6 carries for O'Keefe. He's the wide receiver 1 right now, but Javon Baker, we've seen the clear upside with him when healthy too. I think both are playable. Kobe Hudson's a distant wide receiver 3. The fall off for Hudson's been pretty drastic this year. Memphis, 23rd in pace, 51% pass rate. Seth Hennigan is pretty solid overall. 279 yards as a passer on 34.5 attempts, 218 rush yards. That's pretty good for Hennigan. I think he's an outside consideration in tournaments. It's just UCF's defense is pretty solid. Memphis at home here, that's big. The backfield's a 3-way timeshare, generally between Brandon Thomas, Jevion Ducker, Asa Martin. Asa Martin didn't play last game, so they did give some carries to Sutton Smith. Not sure what's going on there, but none of them get enough work to target. And the receiving room's been a disaster. They've changed up basically who their number 1 is. And I'll just give you the routes because, my goodness, it has been dreadful for this team. They're full experiment mode right now. Javon Ivory is still probably the one. He's got a 71% route rate last week. Tight end Caden Prieskorn, he's the most consistent, 81% and 77% over the last 2 games. From there, I think Joe Skates is now the wide receiver 2. His routes have jumped from 43% to 57% to 69%. 69% was 3rd highest on the team. It was above Eddie Lewis. It was above Gabriel Rogers, above any of the other guys. I think Skates is viable at the Stone Mint to close it out. The rest are tournament plays. But that's it. That's our slate. You can see FanDuel doesn't have salaries up yet. Sorry about that. Recording on Thursday. So FanDuel, please get your salaries up. But that's the slate. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think. If you agree, disagree, if there's something I missed, I would love to hear it. And please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel on the way out. I can't tell you how much that helps us. It helps a ton. So thank you if you've done that. And then if you want to follow on Twitter, you can always reach out. I'm available at Matt_Gajeski, always willing to chop it up. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching. Can't believe it's week 10. We're going to round this out through the regular season and bowl season. So make sure to stay tuned. But otherwise, good luck this weekend. We'll see you guys again next time.